Good morning. Just after 10:30. Expressions like net zero, carbon neutral, sustainability have all become common parlance in the business world. At a time, I guess, when businesses are fatigued, attempting to recover from the pandemic and the impacts of Brexit, and suffering from indebtedness as a result of that survival period that we've all been through. What we hope to achieve today is the opportunity to be able to unpack some of that language and turn it into a dialect that businesses can start to understand, and to take small steps to implement policies which will enable them to move into the next generation, or as McKinsey's call it, the new normal. Good morning, and you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. That's the context that we will spend the next 58 minutes. And to do that, I have a couple of things to say. Firstly, my sincere thanks to the ACCA here in Wales and to their lead in Wales, Lloyd Powell, for initiating this conversation. ACCA are taking a position of thought leadership on the whole green agenda or net zero agenda, and have endless resources and support available for business in that respect. And many of those resources will be made available to the attendees just after this event. So our thanks to Lloyd for that. In order for us to be able to hold this discussion, I am joined by an expert panel, and delighted to welcome Helen Morgan, who's Finance Director of Character.com, Sarah Whale, founder of Profit Impact, Rob Keegan, a name that will be known to many, who's team lead at Triodos Bank, and Hannah Williams, who is CFO at Tiny Rebel Brewing Company. The rules are very simple. Your questions, please, are an absolutely key part of this event. So please feel free to pop your questions on the Q&A channel on this platform. And also make use of the chat channel to share contact details amongst yourselves or amongst the wider group, so that you can benefit from any networking that's possible in this virtual world in which we live. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, please. And just to reinforce, this is a conversation. So if we can all just chip in and chirp up as we go. But my first point is, you know, in a world where businesses have come out of 20 months of survival mode, and some continue to do so, in a world where management and employees are fatigued and concerned about what happens next, in a world where indebtedness in businesses has increased by, you know, the number varies, but if we work with the Bank of England number of 25% across the SME sector, and I think we should focus on the SME sector because predominantly that is the lifeblood of the Welsh economy. What is net zero? What is sustainability? What is carbon neutral? What is green? It's a lot of terminology for something that I think businesses find hard to get their head around.
Thanks for that. I mean, it's a good question. There's lots of jargon. There's a huge number of jargon busters out there which you can research at your leisure. But really, all it is, really simply, is understanding your carbon footprint, okay, and then reducing it as far as you can over time. And that effectively is it. And the plan, and the phrase net zero, is that eventually you've got your carbon footprint here and you'll reduce it. And so you'll have nothing left, and it's net zero at the end. There's one slight caveat to that I think needs raising, and that's, sorry to add some more jargon in, but carbon offset, which possibly some people on the call will have heard. And a lot of organisations that have addressed their environmental footprint have used carbon offset. So rather than changing what they're doing, they're just offsetting their carbon by planting trees, as an example. The correct approach, and the recognised approach, the scientific approach, is reduce everything you can absolutely first, and then what's left, because there will be stuff left, you can't eliminate your carbon footprint totally, then you offset. So that's
let me just interject there for a second, Sarah, if I may, because you've now introduced another couple of terms. One I'll come back to in a second, which is carbon offset, because that for me, I look at this simplistically. I think we need to get to a carbon zero position. Carbon offset is just a sham for me, but we'll come back to that. Not wishing to be contentious in any way, but just unpack for me the concept. What does carbon footprint mean? Because you've now introduced this term into all the other terms that
sorry.
What does carbon footprint mean?
I will try not to do that. It's effectively the carbon that you emit into the atmosphere by your actions. So whether that's jumping on a train, or using your website, or turning on your fire, you emit carbon into the atmosphere. I'm completely oversimplifying it, but that effectively is what it is. And what you do as an individual or as an organization, you add it all up, that is your footprint.
Okay. Let me just come to Hannah. Hannah, you're counting the beans at one of Wales's significant brand names, and certainly within the hospitality trade, one of the leading brand names. Why should we do this? Why is this important?
Oh, that's nice, thanks. For me, it's important for us going forward. I think I've got 3 girls, and to bring them up in a world where we're at now is quite frankly scary as hell. Businesses have got the power, and it's not just the cost to do it, but the movement to do it. So where there's a will, they'll find a way to do it. We're a manufacturer, so I feel like it's our responsibility as well to look at this in a hell of a lot of detail, and not keep the world going the way it's going, and put a stop to it.
So that's an interesting slant. So you're taking a slightly personal agenda to that, which says with your 3 girls, you want to make the world a better place for them. So we need to create change now.
Absolutely, yeah. Because really, I'll be dead and gone by then, and it's that generation that's got to pick this up and then try and fix it. And at that point, it could be a little bit too late to make significant changes where the time is now, really.
I completely agree with Hannah, and that's why I'm sat here today. You can put all your money into your pension for yourself when you're older, or invest in your children's education, but actually what they want is a safe and secure planet to live on in the future. So I completely concur with that.
Helen.
Yeah, I agree with everything as well. I mean, at Character here, we feel like we're facing up to our future now, but the future of the next generation. It's really important to us as a retailer of children's clothing, mainly with, adults as well, but to kind of convey that message. So we've started working with licensors to kind of create educational messages for adults and children, really, on what is sustainability, where does your item of clothing come from, where does it get made, how can you trace it, that type of thing, and kind of, send out that educational message as well to kind of teach, as Sarah went into, all that jargon, all that kind of information. How do you break it down, and how do you kind of start that journey and educate others just around you, but also further generations?
So, Rob, Hannah's talking about a personal agenda driving a business action, which effectively has what it would appear from what Hannah's saying, and I'll explore that a bit more in a second, but would appear that it's become a board level discussion, if I'm to deduct from what Hannah says, that there's a tight focus on carbon footprint and how Tiny Rebel is addressing the environment. So it's likely to be a board level discussion. Isn't this just a wider scope than just businesses? Don't we all have a role to play in this? Consumers, individuals, people?
Yeah, we certainly do. I mean, and there's absolutely lots we can do. I mean, and there's lots of zero cost solutions. I mean, there's simple things like switching off lights when not required, hanging out close to dry. I heard Radio Wales this morning on the Claire Summers was talking on the breakfast show about showering like they do in the Navy to save water, and I didn't stay on long enough to find out what that was about, but it sounded really interesting. But we've all got choices as consumers as well. I think sometimes we don't realise how powerful what we can do is, because we can choose who we bank with. We can choose to invest pensions in sustainable funds. So we've got so much choice: shopping locally, buying organic produce, eating less meat. So there's lots of things we can do on a day-to-day basis. And I think sometimes we look for a big solution to everything, and it isn't necessarily that overnight. It's a transitional change.
So on that big solution piece, and I think I sense from my conversations with businesses that what businesses are looking for is government to fix this. So what is, let's get this one out of the way straight away, because I think it's important that we start to move the responsibility down the line a bit. My view here is that actually it's our responsibility to do this in a framework which may be created by the government. So what is, in our opinion, as a panel, what is government's responsibility in the achieving of net zero? And I don't mind who picks that up.
I'll pick that up initially. I don't feel like it's their responsibility. I want them to enforce it and give advice, because it is like a minefield of knowing, like, what does sustainability mean? Well, it could mean something different to me, to what it does to Sarah, to what it does to Rob, to what it does to Helen. It's all different measures. And I was just thinking then, if you look back at what Rob was saying, consumers now want to deal with the most sustainable, the millennials want to deal with the most sustainable business because it fits their ethos. So if a bank doesn't send out debit cards anymore and everything's on Apple Pay, not just is that a cost saving to the bank for not sending out those cards of plastic, but it's also, it drives towards that sustainable piece. So going back to your question, I think the government should enforce measures and start making people think, and businesses think different and act different towards that. I had to drag, when you were talking earlier about the board and it becoming a personal piece for me, I had to drag our CSR agenda to the board meetings, literally shove it in people's faces going, this is what we're doing. This is what's happening. This is what's going to happen in the future. So let's be the first to put this in place and try and pioneer it. And it's quite scary, actually, because I haven't got a bloody clue what I'm doing. So I'm just winging it and listening to podcasts and trying to learn as I go along. Because there's so much information out there, and it's like, what's relevant to the business and what's going to actually help.
Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, so I certainly agree about the education and the incentivisation. I would also offer a slightly controversial view that we need a consistent messaging from the government, because if we're going to have confidence that and belief that this is something we need to do, and I think we all believe the planet is struggling and we need to get on with it, then why are we supporting, fossil fuels and still talking about investing in fossil fuels? And that just strongly dilute the argument, actually, when things like that still happen. So I think consistency, in my mind, I think we all have to take ownership. You look at what Hannah's done. She's gone to the board and she said, right, guys, we're doing this. It might not be perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And you look how far they've come since they've been doing it. And it's up to us. We are responsible human beings, and we can make that change if we really put our mind to it.
It certainly sounds like every business needs a Hannah to, to drag their heads together to make this happen. I mean that in the nicest possible way, but it's only through your effort that you've actually driven it as an agenda item on the board. Helen, your views on the role of government?
I think a lot of support should be given to banking and financial institutions, because essentially they're going to help us. They're going to help us get on that journey and road, because not everything is cost neutral right now. Hopefully in the future, prices will decrease. But if you're buying through Better Cotton initiatives, FSC materials, things like that, right now, it is more expensive. So really, you need, the support of your banks, institutions that can lend you money, because if you're starting that sustainability journey, then actually you're going to be spending cash. So really, not all businesses can consume it. Some need to go elsewhere. So I think the role of government is supporting, from the top level and making funds available to, institutions, or supporting them along the agenda to help us.
So, Rob, is it the role of government to hand out cash to enable this to happen?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I've just been doing a piece of work which was called Bankers for Net Zero SME project, and we were working with some external companies to look at support for SMEs to reach net zero. And some of the data we worked with indicated that 71% of SMEs could not recommend a single web source to help on decarbonisation. Survey also indicated that in general, SMEs didn't know where to turn for advice, and 40% cited cost as a barrier. So clearly incentives are required. And some of the outputs and recommendations which have been put forward are that SMEs need incentives, whether that be lower taxes, lower cost of capital, and also new revenue generating opportunities. Also need access to high quality, trustworthy information, which includes advice on how to measure and how to finance the necessary investments. And one thing we've suggested there is regional advisory hubs. And from talking to you, Paul, I know that the Chamber have some plans in that regard. And also a standardised approach to measurement and reporting, which we felt was essential, so that access to green government schemes and green finance is not hindered by complex reporting. This was due to be launched at Parliament on Monday just gone, but and we had some big hitters there, like Alex Sharma was going to attend, although it's been put back after the tragic events of Friday.
Okay, so what we're looking for is government to set example, government to be consistent, and government to provide us potentially with non-cash incentives, i.e. reduced taxes or better access to funds to make this happen. That sort of says it's the responsibility of businesses and individuals to take this on and deliver it. Is that what we're saying?
Well, ultimately, it's going to be delivered by people on this call, us. But it's a lot of it's about where to go and how to access finance. We've talked about that already, and some examples on there. Business Wales, for example, have got a finance finder tool which can provide advice on grants and general government support. Banks have a big role to play on this, as already been mentioned, via conventional loans or even the government-backed schemes. And I'm hoping that the successor to the recovery loan scheme will have some sustainability incentives attached to it. In Wales, we're fortunate. We've got the Development Bank of Wales doing some great work. We've got the WCVA and Social Investment Cymru. We've got some good CDFIs, the Robert Owen Community Bank and Purple Shoots. We've also got Bank Cambria, which should be launched this year or next year. And I know Mark Hooper has been doing some great work in that. We've got asset finance providers. But there's also look at creative sources as well. We've got things like crowdfunding, and at Triodos, we've helped to fund a number of projects via this source. So there's lots available in Wales, but I think a lot of it is knowing where to go and who to speak to.
Okay, so Business Wales obviously a key resource there, which is great. If we've now suggested that actually we've got a clear understanding of what carbon zero is, or net zero is, and we've got a clear understanding of where the responsibility for this lies, the next question has to be then, where do I start?
Yeah, that's hard work. That's the pain. I guess what Rob, just going back to what Rob was just talking about, that's all like big shit stuff, right? The loans and looking at that. But actually, if you go into changing culture and changing habits, that's the start. Going back to that shower like you did in the Navy, I heard that phrase the other day, which is actually hilarious because my sister-in-law has the longest showers known to man, so I'm pretty sure she wastes the most water in Wales. But if you just change tiny little things like that, if you look at you could look around you and just put in really easy things in place for employees, like recycling options, cycle to work schemes, car sharing, travel policies like get the train, and all those things they're tiny, but they do make a difference. So that's the cultural change for the start. That big piece of loans, grants, we were lucky enough to cover our roof, which is huge, in solar panels, 100 grand of cash flow out, but the payback on that is going to be really quick because our electric bills are through the roof. So for me, that was a no-brainer. But if you haven't got that cash in the bank to invest in that, that's really tough for a business. So those incentives would help. But then it's exploring the options and understanding how that's going to benefit the business. Because quite a lot of this sustainability piece goes right back to, it delivers on the bottom line at some part. So what you invest in, you will get back. If you streamline processes, if you look at ways to save money and waste, it can go to the bottom line.
So just let me stay with you for a second, Hannah, because that's a real life example, right? And you know, your brewery is well known, your brand is well known. I think I'd just like to explore that a bit more. So you dragged the CSR agenda, the net zero agenda onto the boardroom table, and you forced people to look at it. Just, you know, unpack that a bit. What was that like? How does that happen? Because there are finance directors and there are professionals and there are people in business listening to this saying, that's great, but how do I do it? You know, how do I actually get people to focus on this?
To be brutally honest, it was bloody tough. If you've got people around the table, it's not relevant to them, or they didn't really feel like it was part of what we should have been. It was hard. So I had to probably take it to like 3 board meetings before I was like, I've got to change tact. I need to make sure that I can communicate this properly and they're actually listening. So instead I wrote our policy of what we're going to do, and then made them all agree, and then use examples like the solar panels and how much money that's going to save, what it can do for the company as a whole, and then what it can do going forward with regards to, if we're the most sustainable brewery, of course people want to stock the product, you know, and people want to buy the product, and people will buy into that, because wouldn't you prefer to buy a carbon neutral beer than a beer that's been produced and created a load of waste? So for me, it was really simple, but trying to explain that to people who couldn't quite grasp it or wasn't on their radar, because there's so many other important things, it was difficult to do. So I see this as a sort of side project for me with regards to pulling all of this in place.
Sarah, convincing the wider organization that this works and it's good for the business. Hannah's just talked about, obviously, you know, people will buy the beer if they think the beer comes from a sustainable location. That's a big journey. You know, convincing you've got a sales director out there who's targeted on tins or pounds, and he's not interested in this stuff. You know, this is just a distraction for him. And you've got an ops director who's focused on filling those tins so they get out as quickly as possible. You know, that's the tension in the business, and theoretically, Hannah's supposed to sit in the middle and measure the difference between the two.
That's the actual reality as well. That's exactly it.
Well, I know. Yeah. I mean, it's the same whether you're making beer or picking strawberries or whatever you're doing. You know, somebody's responsible for selling it, somebody's responsible for making it, and the FD sits in the middle and tries to count the difference. And hopefully, the difference is on the right side. So why do I need to listen to Hannah trying to get me to do something different?
So, Hannah, you're clearly very, very persuasive, and I take my hat off to you, and I mean that wholeheartedly, because it's not easy, and this is what I do day in, day out in my role. And I have a fundamental belief that if businesses take the long-term view, this is an absolute no-brainer. To me, it's a financial no-brainer, but also it's hugely compelling for the planet and for society. So to me, it just makes sense. But trying to get people that are, you know, they might be targeted for growth for this year or whatever, try and get them to sit down and to listen. It is hard because as well, the culture we have is very much short term, and that's just the way it is. So I don't have an easy answer. I think probably, Hannah, you should write a book. Actually, you should probably write a book.
Imagine the stories that would be in there, I can tell you.
But I think it's a combination of hearts and minds, actually. It's hearts and minds, and hey guys, look at the long-term view. I mean, we've done a research paper in profit impact, and I think Jimmy is on the call. Maybe Jimmy could pop it in the chat. People can download it. You know, the ROI is there. The ROI for all the reasons about employees, about investment, about this is what society wants. So if society wants something, inevitably the money will be directed there. So yeah.
Okay. Helen, let me just come to you for a second, because it's my assumption, I haven't checked, but it's my assumption, given that somebody who has got a textile background, as somebody who is in the textile sector now, your supply chains are quite long.
Yes, they are.
So just talk us through the actions you're taking and how you're doing what Hannah has done to bring people's attention to your carbon zero position.
Well, I think really it is a board discussion, as Hannah and Sarah have alluded to, and it usually takes one person to bring it to it. For us, the buy-in, the marketing team, we all really have that agenda anyway. And really it's just down to me to make sure kind of the numbers can kind of turn around with it as well. But for us, I would say certain industry pressures come along with it. So when you're producing or buy-in from suppliers, you know, they have to be part now of groups like the SEDEX group, the audit factories, things like that. So I would say outside industry has kind of put an influence on us as well to drive our agenda, but drive it a little bit faster as well. But that means that you can work with your supply chain as well. So we've kind of split two focus areas, one on making the clothes smarter in a sense, and the other focus will be on our supplier and the supply chain. Now, we started small. The things like, you know, we work with charities and partners to kind of any of our returns or samples, we will now pass those on. So it's kind of creating that 360 circular motion. We've reduced things like packaging, but only by a small percentage. We do have a goal, you know, we don't use any virgin plastics. That was our first goal. Then we'll go to 30, we're now going to 30%, then we'll go 50. It's a journey for everyone. It's not something that we looked at and said, right, you know, we're going to be able to do this in, you know, a number of kind of next year, we're going to be able to do it. As you say, our supply chain is long. So we have to think for 6 months in the future, when we're bringing our a sustainability range in now, when we decide to do it, it goes through a reiterative process. And that may not come in for 6 months. So we really have to think very far in the future, but we can't kind of do it overnight. So that's why we kind of introduced little things like, you know, as I said, sharing our returns, getting on board with things like FSC materials where we can put cards in our kind of our products, where you can go back to origin, you know, different things like that. And you can probably see behind me, like the lights turn on and off. If I don't move enough, I save on electricity. So that's been going on and off, as I see. It always does in meetings, but there are little things in offices you can do as well.
Rob, there's an interesting comment from Sivaganam Sivapalan saying, you know, we need to change our business models in order to be able to achieve this. And I guess after 20 months of pandemic and wavering lockdowns and regulations, many business models have changed already. So it looks like we have got a capacity and a willingness to be able to change our business models. As an investor, as a funder, how are you assessing business models? And is it a criteria for you to consider whether the business model has got a sustainable future or a carbon zero future?
Yes, I mean, we're slightly different from most banks because sustainability is something which is at the core of what we do and has been ever since Triodos was formed. So it's something we look at, although we have ramped that up as well now. We look at the credentials of the business. For example, if it's if it owns property, what's the EPC rating of that property, what can they do to improve it, but also being proactive. What finance can we provide to improve that? So sustainability has to be a big part of it. But one thing, we're talking about sustainability from an environmental perspective, which is incredibly important. But one thing we do look at is wider ESG goals. So for those who don't know what ESG is, E is environmental, which we're talking a lot about today. Social is about business relationships. Do you work with suppliers who hold the same values? Does the business support its local community via, for example, donations or volunteering? What are working conditions like for employees? And the G is governance, which ranges from things like accurate accounting methods to key stakeholders having a say on important issues. And also things like, have they got a clear and robust diversity policy? So there's lots of elements going to sustainability. As I say, it's something at Triodos which we've been really on top of for a long time, but I am seeing some clear signs that a lot of banks are following suit now in terms of having a clear sustainability policy in terms of new customers and what they're doing with lending money. So if you're going to a bank with a business plan at the moment, I'd be making sure that making clear what your sustainability credentials are and what your plans are as part of that business plan.
So I think in support of that, Paul Binney's just come up with a comment which says, management buy-in is a real challenge, and it takes one or two advocates, and obviously Helen and Hannah have been those advocates within their businesses. But he goes on to make the point the short-term pennies and pounds are added up and prioritised 95% of the time. So how, Hannah and Helen, have you managed to persuade your colleagues that investment in parts of this journey, this net zero journey, will pay off? Because, if I'm sitting there with X £100,000 in the bank in cash, and Hannah comes up to me and says, I'd like to put £100,000 worth of solar panels on the roof. These are big leaps of faith. And I can understand the solar panel bit is it's more tangible because there's a potential energy saving going forward. But some of these investments will have a less tangible return. How do you overcome that? How do you convince people that that's the right thing to do?
I'm not sure you can overcome it initially. It's, as I say, it's a long process, and I think you kind of we've had to swallow it in a sense, that the case of, as Hannah said, with like tangible, and she said with tangible things, they're very easy to kind of pinpoint and then track through. For us, it's a sense of, we do want all our products to be sustainable over a period of time, over our plan, and be made from all recyclable materials. But actually, that's an OPEX cost. That's an operational thing that will continue with the business, that we have to push into the business and see how far we can work. Now, it will become the case where, during the future, where everyone joins on that kind of train, that costs will reduce. But as I said before, it is not essentially cost neutral for someone who's operating on an operating model, in a sense, more than a CapEx return. It is difficult. And we've had to say, look, we think it's going to cost us X amount of money this year, next year, the year after. But at that point, we're hoping that, when you become that leader, when you share that your brand ethics and what you're doing and your morale, etc., then essentially that should have benefits, but they're not essentially and not immediately tangible to see.
Yeah, I agree with that, Helen. I've had to drag some people to it as well and be like, look at this, why there's a better way of doing it, why don't we look at this? And people hate change. Like, they just inherently don't like change, but then if you pass on the ownership to them, they actually a little bit take it and love it. So one of the guys in packaging dared him to go and find someone to find a better way of pallet wrapping. So not only did he find pallet wrap that was 80% recyclable, it was actually cheaper. So he loved it, thought it was amazing, it was good for our CSR, and he had the accountability for it. So there was a bottom line advantage on it. a CSR advantage on it, and personally he thought that was a great thing that he'd done that for the business. You can quantify that, so you half quantify it and half not. So yeah, it is hard work, but just keep
it's worth it. So I'm going to go back right to the very start of this, and it's something that Sarah mentioned early on, which is you need to measure your carbon footprint. Now, how do we start that? How does that journey start?
So I'll start, shall I? I think the complexity of this really does depend on the sector you're in. So, and whether you've got premises, whether you've got the product. So I would say Helen and Hannah's carbon footprint would be significantly more complex to calculate than my carbon footprint, because we're a virtual small consultancy business. So ours actually was quite straightforward in the end. We just created a little spreadsheet, worked out the metrics, and if anybody wants to know what those metrics are, drop me a line, I'll happily share them with you, that's fine. It's really quite, it's actually quite straightforward to do once you look at what you need to do. When you've got a more complex business, then I would say it'll be interesting to be challenged or supported by Helen and Hannah on this one, is that you really do need some expertise actually to do a proper kind of life cycle assessment in terms of what you're doing. And by that, I mean, really understand the end-to-end carbon footprint of your business. And normally the experts will have carbon calculators that you can use. So that's my two penneth on that one.
Hannah, did you measure, or did you just get out there and do it?
Nope, I haven't got a bloody clue. Just went out there and did it. Absolutely no idea, wouldn't know where to start, and all that's a bit scary. I'd love to know, but I don't. So I just walk around. I did a day in production, did a full day. So I started at 5 a.m. when the first shift started, and then I finished at 10 p.m. when the last shift ended, just to work out the process. And some of it is a second set of eyes coming and going, we can do that a bit better. I haven't got a clue how to brew, not a clue. But you just look at process and it just gives you a different way. I'd love to know our carbon footprint. It probably scare the life out of me when we do it, but I'd love to know it. We brought in Cardiff University a few weeks ago to do a full report on the business that was funded by them. They actually asked if they could do it on us. I've got the report, haven't read it yet, I received it yesterday. But that's to know where we're at, like a benchmark, and then how we can progress going forward. The only businesses I look at to compare us against is Sierra Nevada in America, who are the most pioneering and sustainable brewery in probably the world. The other one is I look at Adnams in England. They're incredible, went to see them. They've got it nailed. They don't talk about it so much, but they've got it absolutely nailed. So it's people like that I want to look at and aspire to. But going back to when you say net zero and carbon neutral and carbon footprint, they're like absolutely scary words because you just don't know where to start. And I think half of it for some businesses is the fear of where to start. So they just don't. Yeah.
So Helen, what did you do?
Very much same as Hannah. I don't actually know. But you start the journey, you know you've got one. So you start it, and same with Hannah, like net zero to us it's a bit of a far away, you know, kind of goal. It's obviously a goal of all of ours, but as I said, it's like before, you start a journey and you have a plan for a number of years. It's not an overnight, and especially for our businesses where it's not just us, but it's outside as well, where we purchase from, where we, you know, we pass goods on to, things like that. And, you know, manufacturing processes and retail processes, it all adds to that kind of complexity of what that is.
So there's a common theme here, which says that we don't know where to start. We don't know how to measure it, but we're just going to dive in and wade through it.
You got to, I think.
and I think that's really interesting. And what there's a thread starting to build in the chat, which is reflective back on the chamber, actually, which is the first time in 20 months of doing these events online that things have turned back on the chamber, which is great. Love to be challenged. But is there a need for somebody to lead this at sort of at SME level, to be providing really practical, sensible guidance and advice and support to businesses, you know, potentially supported by people like Triodos and other sustainable investors. Is there a need for that type of advice?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say 100%. I mean, the more people get together and chat around ideas of how to pull it all together and move this forward would be amazing. Imagine having 100 people on a call and someone directly going, what did you do? Oh, I could learn from that. What did they do? Oh, that's a quick win. That's a longer term plan. Because there's so much information. It's where to go and how to digest it. It's really tough. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time, so I'm still trying to find a really good podcast that explains process that I'm going to put in place and really simple things that I can communicate to the rest of the team to make an impact. How you guys feel?
I agree with that. I mean, I was on the UN Global Compact UK webinar yesterday, and the way they did it was really good. They did webinars by sector, so I joined the professional services sector yesterday. And one of the things they specifically recommended actually was bringing, it's kind of a new way of thinking, I guess, bringing competitors together and say, guys, look, this is such a big problem. We need to help each other, you know, and just form working groups. And I think I think that's the way forward, because this is so complex what we're trying to do.
I agree with Sarah.
Sorry.
I was going to say I agree with you.
Yeah.
And Hannah, because collaboration has to be the key, right? You have, otherwise you'll just break away of different like parts of your supply chain as well, and your customers, things like that. It's a joint effort. And whilst we all wonder, how do we start? Let's start small, things like that. Actually, just joining groups, sharing contacts, you know, just seeing a company and a name and, oh, I wonder what they do, and, you know, different things like that can really help. And as Hannah said, sometimes you just need to hear just one company that does one thing, or, you know, hey, we've reached out to this person and everything. And I think it can really help you start and kind of think, oh, we're actually all in it together. You know, you kind of think that some of the bigger companies are kind of, they're pioneering, they're on their way. We're not all there on our journey, and kind of it's nice to know sometimes as well.
Yeah.
What are your views, Rob? You've been sitting there quietly.
Yeah, I was in awe of some of the things which are being said, because the comments about not knowing how to measure, etc., are common across the SME world. But what is incredibly refreshing are there's some people on this call who've just cracked on with it. And I think a lot of this is mindset, in terms of there's two ways you can look at it. Do it because you feel you have to do it, or because you really want to do it. And there's a couple of people on this call who are clearly doing it because they want to do it, and that's why they're getting results. And I think that is incredibly refreshing, and a lesson to a lot of SMEs at the moment who are waiting for some guidance, which is important. There is some guidance and more guidance needed, and better measurement tools, but we can all make changes. And I say what's great is that there are people on this call who are already making really good changes.
Thank you. I'm going to be a little contentious here now for a second, because there's something that does keep me awake. Firstly, though, what I'm going to say is at about 25 past panel, I'm going to come back to you and ask you for a 60-second sum up, please. Sarah, definitions. Hannah, how do we start? Helen, progress. And Rob, you and I will have the final word. Let me just talk to you a bit about the piece that's bothering me right now, which is 2019. Larger organizations, listed businesses embraced the conduct on a mission statement, which says that at their AGMs, they need to make a statement, and it appears as a balance sheet item, which says this is what we're doing. That is defined into various scopes, scopes 1, scopes 2, and scopes 3. And at scope 3 level, it starts to bring in the entire supply chain. Now, Wales's economy is made up of small businesses which are manufacturing either to consumer or predominantly into supply chain. I have a concern that if some of these businesses have not started their net zero journey, that the larger companies that they supply may actually have to exclude them from their supply chain. So how do we avoid that? Collectively, how do we avoid businesses being structured out of supply chains because they haven't started that journey yet? Go, Sarah, you're itching.
My head was going forward there. So I think this is an important point, actually, for people to kind of reflect on. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need to have a strategy absolutely bottomed out with everything fully calculated, but we need to have a commitment, and a commitment with some level of action. So if you want to be in the supply chains of the corporates and public sector as well, which I would say is it's a big area, then you need to be transparent about where you are on that journey and get on your journey. And that's my view on that one, because there's not really, you could have ISO standards, you could have some level of verified carbon footprint, but you could have there's some more jargon, science-based targets, initiatives. There's things you can do to verify, but I think at this stage, you just need to provide evidence that you're on the journey and you understand what that means. That's my view.
So Hannah, from a sales perspective, do the people who are merchandising and getting the beer out there in the marketplace, do those people, is this a question that they're facing? Are your outlets coming back to you and saying, what's your net zero journey? What are you doing?
No, not the smaller not the smaller sort of pubs outlets, more so the retail. Yeah, so it's starting from bigger corporations down a little bit. But aside from that, I see what you're saying. And for smaller businesses who haven't got a policy in place, or maybe are afraid to, or don't know how to do it, they could fall by the wayside quite quickly. If, for example, when Tesco put in Scope 3, which when I was speaking on a call a few weeks ago, they're looking to do, how that's going to impact those smaller businesses, that's quite scary, especially if that's one of their only big revenue streams. I'm putting it in because I just feel like it's important, really, really important. And trying to make
my understanding of Scope 3 is that it just runs right through the supply chain. So, you can say to Tesco, we've started our journey, and your tin manufacturer might say, we've started the journey in support of that. So you can show that consistency pulling through the supply chain. But if the bloke who's supplying your pallets hasn't started that journey, you're getting to a situation where you need to look potentially for alternative suppliers.
Yeah, which is actually something I'm going to do anyway. So aside from the Scope 3 recommendations or guidelines, if you look at other examples like Boohoo, the clothing company, and sorry if anyone works for Boohoo or know them, they were outed not so long ago with regard to their ethical sustainability of their clothing. The impact on the front end of the value of the business was huge. Their revenue dropped. It's hard to recover from that. So aside from the sustainability piece, that's really important for a business to look at, knowing where they're buying their products from. So the next thing on my to-do list is to speak to all our suppliers, ask them for their CSR policy. Even if they haven't got one yet, it's just to understand where they're at and what they're going to do.
I'll come to you in a second, Helen. But there's just a frightening statistic just been put in the chat by Hugh Williams saying that 60% of your carbon sits in your supply chain in Scope 3. So, wow. Helen, you've got a long and complex supply chain.
We do. But essentially, I don't want to say it's made easier, but everyone's on that journey, especially in our suppliers. And the reason is a lot of it's to do with brands. So we work with licensors and brands. They are already on that journey. The big brands, if you're looking at Disney, Warner Brothers, that type of thing, they're already on that journey. And really, before this, before the sustainability became on the agenda, we were already there in terms of looking at factories, making sure, ethically, They produce goods in, you know, under certain standards. Their factories are audited anyway. So there was like a bit of a stepping stone anyway that we started with. It was just carrying on now with our suppliers on that journey. And as I said, that, you know, kind of there's certain factories opening up now that provide 360, you know, where you can send your returns back. But it's getting the message out. And I think that's the hardest thing, I think, is, you know, how do you then kind of push that down to your customers to know, you know, this is the journey we've been on, this is where we're at, you know, without kind of the only kind of places, you know, through social media and marketing, things like that. But yeah.
So an interesting suggestion has just popped up, Rob. Again, from Siganam. Should we have an index, a carbon footprint measure index, which says, you know, this is how we're rated? Before we
even get there, I think we need to get to be able to measure. And I think there's some fundamental issues to overcome as well. We've talked about understanding supply chains, but I'm not sure if there's a couple of words that have come about in the last few years. Pivot is one word I've picked up in with COVID, and another word is greenwashing as well, because there's lots of inaccurate and ambiguous claims about environmental credentials. So we need to get to a stage where we can authenticate what businesses are doing and properly measure it, and also standardize it, not have lots of different tools, have some pretty standard tools where most businesses or all businesses can use and measure their footprint. An index could be a way of doing it, but we've talked about supply chains. That's already starting. Government procurement, which is a big source of income for lots of businesses. That's already started. And if there's any B Corps on the call, B Corps will know that they are encouraged to do business with other B Corps. So, selecting businesses within their supply chain which are like-minded has already started, but that's going to continue and grow without a shadow of a doubt. So
I'm just going to come back to, again, it was Sarah who started this conversation. I'm just going to come back to this concept of greenwashing and carbon offset. Let's just put some simple terms around that, and let's just try and explain why it may not be the right thing to do.
What, both of them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, greenwashing, I'm sorry to be blunt, is just pointless, because if you're saying you're doing something and you're not doing it, one, you're damaging your reputation, but more importantly, you're not doing it. So it just seems pointless to me. So it'd be much better to say, hey guys, and we're right at the beginning of our journey. We know we've got a lot of work to do, and this is what we're looking at doing, than pretending you've done lots of good work. I just don't understand greenwashing. The offset. I worry for a lot of businesses that one being created on the basis of offset. So offset is effectively where, I think I explained earlier, say you've got carbon footprint of 100 kilograms of 100 tons, say 100 tons of carbon, and you think, oh well, I can't get rid of that in my business, or it's too difficult. It's easier for me to pay a sum of money for a particular project, like I say, whether that's planting trees, and that makes up for the 100 tons that we've got over here. Now, the problem is, if everybody offsets, we're never going to fix the problem. And that really hits to the heart of why greenwashing is a problem, because what we're trying to do, and I think really, really simply is a takeaway here, is what we're trying to do with net zero is to make a change. It's for us all to change what we're doing, to get on that journey, whether that's individuals or businesses. And offsetting and greenwashing just doesn't change anything.
I guess the airline industry has been pretty famous for offsetting, haven't they? I mean, you've been able to buy your flights to the Barbados and somebody will go and plant a tree somewhere.
Yeah.
And it never really felt comfortable in doing that, because we're not actually addressing the root cause of the problem, which is the carbon utility on the journey. Okay, we're into the last couple of minutes. Let's just refresh. going round, everybody please, let's just refresh what our advice is to businesses, because there's a bunch of businesses on this. There are obviously some advisors on this as well, which is excellent, because all of the content that you're producing and all of the links, etc., that are appearing in chat, I'm sure, I haven't had a chance to look at them all, but I'm sure they're all incredibly valuable. And what we will do is we will circulate those to all of the people who have registered for this, and thank you for that. It's been hugely useful. But in very simple terms, in the last 2 minutes, can I just ask you all, just summarize, what does it mean? Why should I do it? And how do I start? And let me start with Sarah on what is it, Hannah on why should I do it, Helen, where do I start? And then Rob and I will talk about how we help businesses to get to that point. Go, Sarah.
Okay. So it is your carbon footprint is basically the effect of what you and your business is doing, the decisions you make and the actions you have. And I won't take over. Go on, Hannah, you go next. In a summary, I think that's a summary of what it is.
Okay.
So why should you do it? There's a few benefits. It feels good when you know you do something productive. It can inherently increase revenue through different ways and increase your bottom line figures. That's a byproduct of being more sustainable. It is quite scary initially, but if you break it down, we broke ours down, our CSR agenda, into 3. So community, sustainability, environment, and people. And that makes it more manageable and more tangible, and people can buy into it because they can see how they influence different parts of that. The measuring part is quite difficult, so that they're just stepping stones, but I don't feel like there's an end to this. This is just going to be continuous improvement constantly, because if you, in a dream world, hit carbon neutral, then after that point, you're getting into carbon negative, and that's where we all want to be. The more carbon negative, the better for the environment to repair all the damage we've done.
Helen?
I would say, similar to Hannah, where do you start is just break it down. You can go small to begin with. Our goals are very loose, but we know where we want to get to. And even if it's your end goal is carbon neutral, or, kind of using sustainability in all kind of materials, etc., then essentially that can be a 5 to 10 year plan. It doesn't have to be overnight, and you won't be able to do it overnight either. So I'd say, same as Hannah, you break it down. For us, we had a couple of focused areas. We looked at the clothes we made, but then also our suppliers, but then also internally as well. So, and the community. So I'd say just break it down, take small steps. And even if your first start is, putting lights in, like I've got to go off and on all the time, or, giving back to charities, if you've got anything that you can pass on. IT systems, we haven't touched on IT systems, but if you can go a bit more paperless and things like that, just start small, but get your plan and start on that journey.
Thanks, Helen. So, Rob, it sounds like it's government to set the example and the frameworks, industry to take responsibility and just, in Hannah's words, get stuck in and do it, and for the professional sector and the academic sector to work in partnership to support all of that. Is that where we've got to?
Absolutely. And just to reiterate what a few things have been said, start small. If you're concerned about being unsure or not having a plan, you're not alone. But if you're going to take some inspiration, I think listening to Hannah and Helen today, I've certainly been inspired. Support is on the way. There's pressure on government in terms of measurement, advice hubs, and also better access to finance and grants, etc. I work for a Dutch bank, and if people have worked with Dutch people before, they'll know they're very, very blunt and very direct. And a phrase I was told at one of my first meetings with some Dutch colleagues was, it sounds quite, if anybody speaks Dutch, forgive me, but they said to me, "Do it nu," which means do it now. In other words, get off your backside and do this. So, and I've heard that from a few people on this call today. So that's one message I'd like to give to everybody, is take inspiration from some of the things which have been said in here, because I certainly have.
Rob, that's a fantastic line to finish on. Thank you very much indeed. To Helen, to Hannah, to Sarah, to Rob, thank you so much for that really lively and valuable contribution. It's been fantastic. To Lloyd and the ACCA, thank you for starting this. It's a journey I hope that we can continue. And to everybody who's attended, your attendance is appreciated, and we will be getting all of this content out to you, which hopefully will provide a good reference point for you to move forward on. So thank you all very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.